in. So we have with us today Dr. Van Halen. I came to know him from an article he wrote about traveling with heart failure, and we invited him to speak with us. And we're doing it through the magic of Zoom today. So thank you very much, Dr. Van Halen, for joining us. And why don't you tell us, I didn't mention it, why don't you tell us your title and your background in cardiology?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. I just learned about mended hearts, and I'm quite interested in the way you're approaching heart diseases. I think this is extremely useful, and I can only try and help a little bit. As myself, I'm a senior cardiologist in the University of Göttingen in Germany, and
Mhm.
I'm a professor of metabolic cardiology there. Since none of us probably knows Göttingen, it's like 2 hours away from Berlin by train, and it's a bit like the belly button of Germany. It's a very small city, but it's a big university.
Is it south of Berlin? What part of Germany are you in?
It's rather west of Berlin. It's like 30 minutes south of Hanover.
Oh, okay. I know where that is. My daughter studied in Berlin, and so I've visited and we've gone to Oktoberfest, of course, but because Americans
Yeah.
tend to do that, you know.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Oktoberfest is more to the south of Germany.
Right.
That's more Munich. You don't have any Oktoberfests in the rest of Germany,
No,
and
I
no leather
know.
forts as well.
I know those are Bavarians down there. I should say that was before my first stent was put in, that I went to Oktoberfest. I don't think I could go now.
Well,
So
there's always more occasions, I guess.
I suppose. But so as I say, I was looking for information about traveling with heart disease, and I came across the piece you did with several co-authors about traveling with heart failure. Could you perhaps give us a top line summary of what you found? As I read it, it seemed like there is a higher incidence of heart problems with people who've already had heart failure when they travel. Is that right?
Well, the thing is, when we talk about heart failure, we're talking about a rather serious condition
Right.
because many people think when something is wrong with the heart that this is heart failure, but this is not the case. Heart failure means there are symptoms on exercise like shortness of breath, like um, swollen ankles, like easy fatigue during exercise. So this is more like heart failure, but there are several heart diseases, and not all of them are heart failure. I think there's a bit
Exactly.
of a misconception sometimes.
Yes. Thank
Um,
you for saying that.
well, I'm the chairperson of the heart failure study group in the German Cardiac Society, and I kind of um, sparked the idea to do a manuscript on traveling with heart failure. And all my colleagues they looked at me and thought, "Wow, now he's got it." Um, but we really found so much information when we started collecting these informations, and we wrote the article on it, and we submitted it to Nature Reviews Cardiology, and they finally published it. And the interesting bit about this paper is really that it's not cited very often, but it has been downloaded 40,000 times already. So there seems to be a lot of interest in the topic. And I even consider your invitation as a lot of interest on the topic. So
Yes.
it's a pleasure to talk about it.
You think it's more patient interest than cardiologist interest? As
I
I said,
think it's really both. I think it's
okay.
both because there has been a lot of Twitter or X traffic on this paper that we
Oh,
published, and this was also done by cardiologists. Even the German Heart Foundation approached me, and we did a podcast on traveling with heart failure, and this is
oh.
intended for patients as well. So I think this is both interest on the patient side and also on the doctor side.
Mhm. And what were the findings of that paper? Again, specifically for people who have experienced heart failure.
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's really a paper that has several aspects because we try to cover, for example, the choice of destination. You can
Oh,
When you talk about the choice of destination, we're talking about, for example, the climate at the destination site. Um, Usually, it's better to travel in spring or in fall rather than in summer or in winter because of the usually stronger weather conditions during those times.
Hmm.
We're talking about air pollution, or we're talking about altitude. If you take, for example, and I like this example, Mexico City. Mexico City is in an altitude of 2,200 meters,
Mhm.
and it sometimes in the year it has a lot of air pollution.
Yeah.
So when someone with heart failure travels there, this means you have to adapt to two conditions, to air pollution and also to the altitude. And so my recommendation is really just take your time. Don't start on a big journey from a city like Mexico City, like on the same day of arrival. Rather, try to take your time, adapt to the circumstances, maybe wait 2 days, and then travel on.
Okay,
So,
so get acclimatized to the different, as you said, the altitude and the pollution. I've been there. It is a very polluted place. Um,
mm,
and
yeah,
you
there's
don't.
many places around the world. I mean, I checked there's a website, IQAir, I think it's .com,
Mhm.
and you can check the air pollution of any place in the world, like on a daily basis. I checked Chicago today; it's perfect.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day out here. Well, we have issues with air pollution too, as many big cities do.
Mm.
So that's interesting. So you need to think about the destination you've picked and the time of year that you're going to be flying. And
Yeah, but also it's about the distance to the destination because usually if you take air travel, for example, usually the magical distance is 4 hours because after 4 hours there's an increase in the risk of thrombosis.
mhm,
So it's better to, of course, walk around, drink a little bit on the aircraft, not alcohol, not coffee, because this is really we're talking about volume depletion then, because both coffee and alcohol they have diuretic effect. But it's good to keep fluid balance. So drink water or drink some soft drinks or something on the aircraft, and even there's something very curious that we found. Sitting on a window seat doubles the risk of thrombosis as compared to an aisle seat, just
right.
because you have to ask your neighbor, "Excuse me, would you let me out?"
Mhm.
People are rather reluctant doing that. So
Yeah, that's
yeah, well, there's really curious things that we found when we tried to research on this paper.
uh-huh. That's fascinating because I usually get aisle seats for that very reason. And I was just stuck on a plane for 5 hours a few weeks ago, and I was worrying the whole time. I was trying to get up and down, but so 4 hours is sort of the magical number you found, right? Which
Mm,
here
yeah,
in
that's
the
right.
U.S. from Chicago to Los Angeles would be 4 hours. Chicago to the West Coast is 4 hours. So that's sort of the optimal flighting time, huh? What about
Mm.
should people be worried about whether there are portable defibrillators on a plane when they're flying? Do those help? Have you looked at that?
Well, no, we did not really look at defibrillators. We looked at implantable defibrillators, obviously, because if you
Hmm.
go for the metal detector, um, usually it's easily possible to walk through metal detectors at the airport, even with an implanted device.
Hmm.
You should just not linger. And if a handheld wand is used, they should not like um, swipe across a device many times because this might be harmful to the device. It's always better to ask security staff for a pat down kind of security check.
Okay. So
But
if you have a pacemaker, you would ask security to just physically examine you.
yeah, that's probably better. But as I say, it is even with a pacemaker or an implanted defibrillator possible to walk through the metal detector. What do you call it? Arch.
Yeah.
Um, so that is possible. You just not linger in that arch. Just walk.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
And what about, I think you mentioned it, or it was in the list that someone mentioned it to me. What about your medication? People should be traveling with their medications in their carry-on bags, right? Not to put them into a suitcase, which might get lost in transit somewhere.
Yeah, 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 I cannot stress this often enough. It is really important to have all the important things, and I consider drugs as important to have them on the carry-on luggage and not in the suitcase that is in the well, somewhere in the aircraft where you cannot reach it. Because, for example, when I traveled from Barcelona back to Germany like last year, my suitcase arrived 9 weeks later. That was
Oh,
really terrible. And just
wow.
even if it's only 3 days, I mean, and you don't have your drugs or medication with you, that really makes you well nervous, and
Hmm.
you don't want that situation. So always have all important bits and pieces like in the carry-on luggage, and even the latest discharge letter, for example, or the device interrogation sheet that maybe or printout that you have received from your doctor. All that really keep it in the carry-on luggage. But
Hmm.
most important, really the drugs, and always have drugs for not only if you travel 14 days, rather take drugs along for 3 weeks.
Always have extra, yes, in case you're stuck
Mm.
somewhere. And what about getting in the US, if you travel from city to city here, the most of the pharmacies are national now. So if you do forget something, you can order it in a different city. Is that possible traveling to Europe, or does that get much more complicated?
Well, we didn't investigate on that. I would think it is not easy because you would have to talk to a doctor who's
Hmm.
able and willing to prescribe, and this may even take a few days until you really find a doctor who's willing to do so. So it's better to not forget because even if I travel around in Europe, maybe in Italy, trying to find a missing drug. I would probably recommend go to an outpatient department of a hospital or even to an A&E, so accident and emergency department in a
Hmm.
hospital and ask them for advice. Otherwise, it might be really not easy. But
Hmm.
I don't have any experience really with that.
Okay. Yeah, I know
Mm.
my wife has a sister-in-law who's Dutch, and she was visiting from Holland a few years ago and forgot some medication, and we had to do what you described. We had to make an appointment with an American doctor for her to be examined first, and then prescribe the drug all over again. It was very
Yeah,
long.
exactly. And you
Yeah,
have to pay yourself, I'm sure. So that
yeah,
also comes at a certain cost.
that's true. The insurance probably would
Mm.
carry over. Are there times heart patients should not travel? Are there times after different types of heart procedures or surgery when they shouldn't be traveling?
Yeah, exactly. There's a number of considerations. For example, if you take after an device implantation, that's usually recommended to only travel 2 weeks after discharge. Or if you take a cardiac decompensation, so there's usually 6 weeks recommended after discharge and rehabilitation is done, and the patient should be stable again. Or if you take things like acute myocardial infarction, there's also usually a few weeks recommended
Really?
after discharge and rehabilitation before traveling should be considered again. So usually we're talking about important events like acute MI, acute decompensation, implantation of a device. I'm not talking
Hmm.
about heart transplantation because this is really a big event. Um, but even those kind of small or small might be the wrong word, but even those um, not major events, even a few weeks are usually needed.
And something simpler like a stent, do you have to wait after that as well? I mean, they're doing those here, sending people home the same day, which is stunning to
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the thing is, after a stand implantation, I think I would also, even this is only, I would call it a minor procedure
me.
because it is not an emergency. It's like a planned implantation in many cases.
Hmm.
Um, And but even in such a case, you never know if something might be happening, like on the day after discharge, for example. So my recommendation would to be to wait like a week um,
Okay,
after discharge to really start traveling.
okay, okay.
But
One of
even, I mean,
our,
even
go ahead.
if you, for example, travel inside the US, um, things are easier. If you travel abroad, things are getting more difficult
Mhm.
because if you don't know the language, for example, if there's a completely different health insurance system, things are more difficult. If you travel inside the US, things are easier.
Yes, yes, and then many Americans tend to travel south. You mentioned Mexico and the
Mm.
Caribbean, and sort of obscure small islands. I don't know
Yeah, yeah,
what kind of
exactly.
medical care they have there. I haven't done that. I like to go to colder climates on vacation, but um, I guess the lesson there is just be aware of the health system wherever you're going too, right?
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah, that's right.
should people should heart patients know where the major cardiac centers are when they go to a certain location? Is that a good idea? Is that a little
It
extreme?
would. Yeah, it would be my recommendation to really find out. In particular, I mean, you talk about heart patients. I'm talking about heart failure patients,
Yes, yes.
and the thing is that we really researched heart failure, but
Mhm.
heart
Mhm.
patients is such a huge or broad
Yes,
spectrum
yes, exactly. Of
that we really couldn't cover because we're
course.
talking about arrhythmia, we're talking about
Mhm.
coronary artery disease. There's so many different conditions, and
Yes.
so there would be a need of specific advice. But my recommendation for cardiac patients is try and find out prior to departure where is a specialist or where is a doctor that could help, and possibly even does that doctor speak my language? Um, because particularly in Europe, this is important, of course, also probably everywhere outside the US.
Hmm.
Mm.
What about one of our members asked about considerations if you're going on a cruise? There's a feeling of being perhaps a bit more isolated when you're on a ship going from port to port. Uh,
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you talk about cruises, the problem is, I think you are pretty safe on board because usually, I mean, on the large vessels, there's usually a doctor on board
mhm,
that can help. They even may take you off board in case something happens, like even with a helicopter or whatever is needed.
mhm,
Um, the moment you go or you alight at certain harbors, which might be countries, for example, in the Caribbean, um, then you may find completely different scenarios, like completely different healthcare systems. Um, or if you take, for example, morphine derivatives, then you might even get encounter problems at the customs because such drugs are not allowed to be taken into certain countries. So
mhm.
there is a number of considerations, really. But I think cruises themselves, apart from the weather, we're not talking about altitude there, obviously, and large vessels, they have medical trained staff. So I think cruises are something that, well, I think in many cases can be recommended.
Okay, okay. So no unusual or extra precautions if you're going on a cruise as opposed to flying somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
I assume we're taking a train. I mean, that's more common in Europe than here, but people do take
Yeah,
long
that's true.
trips too.
But even if you go by car, like sitting for 4 hours in a car is exactly the same like sitting in a plane for 4 hours. Uh, you have to be sure to move your legs sometime.
That's a great point. I mean, we do
Mm.
tend to do longer car trips here. And I don't think people worry about those as much. Somehow, I guess they feel they're in control because whoever's
Because they're
driving the
driving
car.
themselves, yeah.
Right, yeah, they can get to a hospital if they need to, or whoever's driving them can get them to a hospital. Um, you mentioned altitude about Mexico City and flying. What impact does that have on a heart patient to be at higher altitude?
Um, I think what you need to consider, I mean, we just discussed a patient in my hospital who is a heart failure patient, and he wanted to go to Machu Picchu
Oh,
um, in Peru,
mhm.
which is at an altitude of 5,000 meters. But for heart failure patients, it is generally not considered safe to go above 3,500 meters.
Really?
So we really discouraged this.
Oh,
Because what's really happening is that the sympathetic nervous system is being activated, so the heart rate at a high altitude, say above 3,000 meters maybe, the heart rate goes up, the respiratory rate goes up, and this is what makes patients more prone to develop pulmonary edema.
oh, really?
Um,
Mm.
so it's really important to not go from a low altitude to a high altitude very quickly. Again, it's about taking your time and do things rather slowly, like even
Really?
the change in the altitude.
That was a question one of our members asked as well, is that when she goes on tours and there are things planned every day, and she sometimes feels too tired to do the tour. I mean, your advice would be listen to your body, rest first, don't push
Yeah,
yourself.
take it slowly. Take it slowly.
Yeah.
My recommendation is also is like always the same. Take it slowly. Even, for example, arriving at the airport, sometimes extremely crowded, which
Hmm.
is really a stress factor. So rather arrive maybe 2, maybe 3 hours early, to be sure that you just have all the time to reach the gate.
Hmm.
And I mean, if things happen like, I mean, in Europe, we have all the time that um, only 20 kilograms of luggage weight are allowed. And if you have 23 kilograms, people are hectically starting to unpack their suitcase, try to fit things into another suitcase so that
Yes.
this overweight and all this just creates stress and just don't 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 be there too late so that you have just all the time. That is really my big recommendation.
So perhaps also find less busy times to fly, although that's gotten more difficult now because people are flying all the
Well,
time, it seems. But
when I'm flying, it's always busy. I don't know if there's less busy times.
yeah. I
But
used
if
to
it's
try to
possible.
get early flights. I used to when I was working. I'm retired now, but when I had to do a lot of flying, I would try to leave before 8 o'clock in the morning.
Mm,
That's busy now too. I think because those are the cheaper flights that everyone's trying to get on those, especially
yeah,
leisure
that's true.
travelers. I was just doing a quick conversion when you mentioned 3,000 meters. That's 9,800 feet for our measurement
Okay.
system. So
Yeah, the
that's
thing is, I mean, each travel and each patient is really an individual decision. I can only strongly advise go to your doctor. There is no such thing as general recommendations, but rather go to your doctor, talk to your doctor 4 to 6 weeks prior to departure, because whatever the destination is, it's always a very individual decision and a
mhm.
very individual advice needed.
So that's great advice too. So before a major trip, you really should touch base with your doctor.
Yeah, I strongly recommend that.
If
Talk
you're
to your
doing
doctor.
shorter trips, like a weekend outing, or do you think can you just do that without as much preparation, or
Oh, question is, where are you planning to go? I
mm,
mean, if you go to a completely different climate zone, if you live in Chicago and you travel to Florida, that is a major difference in climate.
mhm,
So I don't think there is really general such a general advice that I could give, because it really depends on what your status, on what your health status is, and
mhm,
what your vital parameters are. What is your heart rate? What is your blood pressure? And what is your medication like? Things may always need adjustment, and
mhm.
this is really not an easy question.
Right. So just keep in touch with your doctor. Sounds like
Mm,
the most important
absolutely.
advice. I mean, we have electronic portals now for the hospitals. Like I can send my doctor a quick email if I have a question, and
Mhm.
they're usually pretty good at answering within a day or two. So I guess that would be a good place to start, just to say, well, I'm planning a trip. Should I come in for an exam or should we talk or what's your
Mm.
advice? That might be the easiest way to do that because often someone on their staff can answer that before the doctor has to get involved.
Well, the
Um,
thing is, any implanted device, like a pacemaker, like a defibrillator, you can always even remotely check.
right.
Even if you have an implanted pacemaker and there is internet connection, you can even check this device in Machu Picchu. This is
Hmm.
no problem. But
Mhm.
you would have to prepare that, and that is really the big bottleneck about everything, that you have to prepare well in advance.
Mhm, mhm. Are there any special concerns for people with valve implants? They seem to be more and more of the TAVR valve. Is that what it's called there too? Where they implant new valves in your heart?
Well, this is something that we also did not really investigate
Okay.
because this is not a very heart failure-like question. But are there general considerations? I mean, if it comes to anticoagulation, there might be necessities. But in general, I think traveling also is possible with an implanted valve. But again, very individual decision.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
mm,
And I know this is very a bit far afield, but as I mentioned, we also talk about the psychological impact of being a heart patient and
mm,
the psychological impact. I mean, that's why we decided to have the meeting on this topic because several of our members were saying, "Well, I have to travel. I'm a little worried." And our one of our medical people said, "Well, as long as you have your medication and things, you don't have to worry." But you still worry, you know. Any advice for people on how to stay calm when they're getting ready? I guess it goes back to just touching base with their doctor first and getting whatever
well,
information they need.
the thing is, I mean, whenever something changes, or you have the feeling that something changes, or something is starting to hurt that never has hurt before, then you start to worry. I
Mhm.
can completely understand that. Um, but in most cases, things stay stable. But if for example, um, pain changes, if you always had a certain level of angina whenever you walked up a staircase, always the same, then this is called stable. But if something is unusual, then you should be really alert.
Hmm.
And but there's so many unusual circumstances because you always have a feeling that something might be changing. How to stay calm? This is not such an easy question. But the thing is, you can rely on your doctor, I guess. Ask your doctor. What when I, for example, I'm approached by patients and they ask me, I always have um, these my heart skipping a beat, and my first question is, does this happen when you are in bed in the evening? And the usual answer is yes, because this is when you just lie flat, you have nothing to do but trying to get to sleep. You just listen more to your body at that time. So be alert, but don't overdo it.
That's good advice. That's good advice. I know exactly what you mean. I have AFib too. I've developed that recently, and normally I don't feel it during the day, but when I'm in bed at night, I feel it. And initially it worried me, and then I just calmed down about it and I talked to my doctor about it, but I realized it was just in that quieter environment, it was easier to notice it. Um,
Yeah, exactly. This is what it's about. But again, it's always a good point to really talk to your doctor about new sensations that you may feel or encounter.
Yes, great. Well, I think that's a good advice to end with too. We're at about half an hour, and I don't want to take up more of your time. But thank you very much. It was great speaking with you, and I'm sure you've given our members a lot of great advice. I will we'll be showing this at our meeting next week, as I mentioned, and then I'll put it up on we have a YouTube channel for our chapter as well. So I'll send you the link once it's up there as well. If you want to share it with others as well, feel free.
Yeah, please do. And our paper can be downloaded for free from the journal website.
Okay.
And there is a lot of text boxes in there or info boxes that may be helpful. For example, with regards to what distance is needed from a mobile phone to an implanted device, about overhead electric in train systems,
Okay.
what kind of distance is needed, what vaccinations are needed, and so on. All this is in the paper. So
Excellent. So it sounds very detailed, and anyone who's had heart failure, I'm sure would want to see that. Yeah, I'll put that link on our website as well, so they can download the paper.
yeah, please do. And again, please see your doctor before you travel.
Great advice, Tanwit. Thank you so much, doctor. And if you find yourself in Chicago again, please come see us.
All right, my pleasure. Thank
We'll
you so
take you
much for
out
your
for a
time.
heart-healthy dinner. Thank you
All
very
right
much.
then.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.